With apologies to anyone not listening from Southern Ontario today or watching, we are still in golf shirt season. I ran into the long time and highly regarded former trainer with the Guelph Storm when I was at the Storm game, Rangers Storm on the weekend, Rusty Hammond, and he said, "This isn't hockey weather. This is playoff hockey weather. I guess it's coming a little early, but oh, we are being treated to summer like conditions in Southern Ontario. And Dan Mahar, I'll tell you what, I am here for it. Please and thank you."
Yeah, the older I get, Mike, the more I'm okay with the shorter winter. Used to be outside all winter as I was younger, but the older I get, it's like, I'm good with the January, half of February winter. That's fine by me.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was walking into the Memorial Auditorium in Kitchener, Jim, who works the media entrance, said to me, and this would have been on Friday's game, he said, "You know what? I'll take this until April and then it can get warmer." So, absolutely, we are all enjoying this. And just on that note, I will add, I started my OHL broadcasting career in Guelph many, many years ago. I love going back there. The arena staff, especially Gary Botter, I'll shout him out specifically, his son Blake, just a couple of stone cold beauties. A lot of the team staff is the same team staff that was there all those decades ago, but it's like a little bit of a homecoming, almost like a reunion every time I go in there. I love it. But dear Guelph, you're not in the third world. I do believe the internet exists. I do not know why you cannot, for love nor money, get a signal inside that building. It makes it tough to work. And then they've got this cold air fan that's blowing right onto the broadcast area. I think they do that to the visiting broadcasters on purpose. That's just their little, it's like the phone calls that used to come during the middle of the night during the Summit Series, right? Waking up the Team Canada players. Yeah, yeah. They blow cold air on us on purpose just to see how tough and I'll raise my hand for this, soft we are. Because I am as soft as they come.
So the KGB is affiliated with the Guelph Storm, is what you're saying. So
Well, GB, Gary Botter. Hey, there you go. If the shoe fits, Botter, if the shoe fits, wear it. All right, we've got a lot of ground to cover on the pod this week. We got emails, we've got eligibility changes that could really impact the CHL. So much to talk about. Not to mention an historically bad start for one of our OHL teams, but we are forced, I think, to start with the latest allegation to surface. This is a 10-year-old story dating back to 2014, but it is another, and I do emphasize another allegation of a gang sexual assault on a young woman that took place back in 2014. Dan, I'll start with you on thoughts of the story that was broken by Rick Westhead and W5 this past week.
well, my heart sinks a little every time you hear these things, does it not? Like, because I mean, all these thoughts cross your mind of as they surface. Well, how many of these things were there? Was this just a cultural thing for so long? Like, who ringleads these things? How did they get covered up? All these things go through your head, and I think the silver lining, which I'm always inclined to search for, is in the reporting of Rick Westhead. He's done this for years now and giving a voice to victims to come forward, which I think is the nearest pathway to ending this culture. I know it's going to take a while, and these allegations in this latest one are, I mean, certainly the details have not emerged, and we don't want to presume guilt, but the more this happens and comes to light, I think that at least people that would be have the inkling to do this have now will think twice at very least. If they're not going to be better people, they'll at least curtail these activities. So there is a silver lining there, Mike, but it's just so disheartening.
You touch on something, Dan, that is on my mind when it comes to this too, and that is the question of how many of these are there. And I will simply answer with more. I'm not going to try to even pretend to be an expert in all of this. I don't have the depth of experience by any stretch of the imagination. I know this, though, and I will say it, that it takes an incredible amount of courage and strength to come forward, as this woman has, even a decade later, to share this story, to make contact with police and begin this process. So uh, my heart goes out to her and acknowledging the strength that she has taken to get to this point. I have because I've been around the rinks the last number of days, heard a whole bunch of rumors slash questions about the geographic location of this, and I'm hearing different rumors. It doesn't matter, certainly not at this point. Uh, why 10 years later, and should this still stand? Well, of course it should. And as we heard from the reporting from Rick Westhead, this woman, when she saw that woman in London come forward last year, it kind of triggered this for her and the process began. So that makes some sense, but it really doesn't matter how long back this goes. When somebody is bringing forward the allegation, we take it seriously and credit them for the courage that they've shown getting us here. So where I'm at on this is to what you said, how many more of these? The only answer I can give is more. This is something that needs to be rinsed out of the hockey culture. And we've talked about this a lot, Dan. I'm not going to sit here and slam away on it again, but I would submit to you that there are many more of these stories to come out before they are all rinsed away. And then we can begin the process of reforming this culture that has allowed this sort of thing to fester for far too long. I will add on the tail end of that, I did appreciate what the Ontario Hockey League did, and that was within 24 hours of the story coming out, the league issued its own statement in response, making us all aware that it had only learned about the allegations when the report surfaced. It takes them very seriously, and also pointed out that they do have I think it's called the onside. I should have double checked that. My apologies. But they have the program that's been operating in the league for 8, 9 years now in an attempt to create the culture that we all want the game to have. So I think that was a positive step on the part of the league to acknowledge that it didn't know of this prior, that there is work being done because it recognizes there is a problem. And I will leave it on the point that we talk about this league all the time as being the greatest development league in the world for hockey players. I think it has to take seriously its role as being the greatest development league in the world for young men as well.
100%, Mike. And there are so the league is doing a lot. Let's just say that they're doing a lot to bring this to light and train those in the league. The one piece here that I think has to be taken seriously by everyone involved is just their own unique role in anything that may come about. So anytime these things happen, team staff, coaches, billet parents, you name it, anyone affiliated with the team needs to look in the mirror and say, well, what's my role in this? And as minor as it could be, you have to look back and say, well, it might be there. And these latest allegations we talked about happening at a billet home. I'm not blaming the billets by any stretch, but in terms of that messaging that comes back and forth throughout the year, one thing that's troubled me about these latest allegations, Mike, and a few of the previous ones is the kind of gang nature of it. They tend to be multiple of these hockey players with one girl, and just the dynamic that's just horrific to think about. But you have to ask yourself, what is the messaging to the players in leadership positions on these teams? And do these players who are 19 and 20 years old understand the power and influence they have over 16 and 17-year-old players and how that can play out? And coaches, are you picking the right people to be those leaders in your room? Are they trustworthy on every level, morally and otherwise, to be left alone with those young players? And so what I'm getting at is there's a lot of people that potentially can influence what goes on throughout the course of a season, and each and every one of those people kind of has to look at what that role is and see something, say something, don't turn a blind eye. There's all kinds of things that can be taken, lessons that can be taken from this. If we're going to write it out, because the sad reality is these people do walk amongst us, and if they feel secure in doing these things without being ratted out, then they'll continue.
You hit all the right notes there, Dan, from where I'm sitting for sure. And that, to me, is the opportunity that the game has as we rinse out these stories and those stories still to come. This is the opportunity to use what you just talked about as the building blocks to have the game and the game's culture celebrated the way many would want it to be celebrated today. There are great stories. We can talk about them. However, for now, we're getting these really horrendous stories that also need to be talked about. So the opportunity is there with all of the things that you just talked about as this game generally, and it's not exclusive to the OHL or the CHL, but as this game grows and moves forward and matures and the culture changes. So we will continue to watch with interest and hope that they continue to build on those very blocks that you just mentioned. Okay, if you are going to have a fire sale, you better bring a hose to keep the fans cool while you're in the midst of it. And could the American Hockey League start to admit younger players? That and so much more still to cover on this week's episode of the OHL podcast. As you know, we talk about the OHL on this show, but the National Hockey League is back. The quest for the Stanley Cup is underway now that the puck has dropped on the 2024-25 season. We want you to get in on all the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NHL. Look, if you're a first-time user and just getting started, don't worry. It is easy, and you can start with something simple like picking your favorite team to win. Just go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your team, and place your first bet. I'm going to show you how easy it is by doing it right now. So I'm on my phone. I'm on the Sportsbook app. I'm going to go to NHL, and I'm going to look up my favorite team. Oh, wouldn't you know, as we record, I'm missing my favorite team. The Leafs at home to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Leafs are a minus 142 on the money line. It is that easy to place the bet. Remember that odds are subject to change. Tomorrow's game, from the time we're recording, Jet Luchenko and the Philadelphia Flyers, home to the Washington Capitals. Sorry, Guelph Storm fans, had to throw it in there. But the Flyers are a minus 120 on the money line. Again, odds are subject to change as the game approaches, but that's how easy it is. And we want it to be worth your while. So if you're new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers can bet $5 to get $200 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $200 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings, the crown is yours. Dan Mahar, the Peterborough Petes, had their worst start to a season before this season back in 2010-2011. The Petes that year started 1-6, their worst in franchise history. Remember, the Petes are one of the longest standing and proudest franchises in this league, going back more than 6 decades. 1-6 in 2010-2011. They are 0-8-1 through 9 to start this one. Ouch. I'll just say ouch.
That is ugly. I think we all expected it wasn't going to be pretty, but we were hoping it probably wasn't going to be this ugly. Now, it's still October. We know that they're likely not making the playoffs. What you want to see is inroads over the course of the year. So I think what Peterborough's eyeing more is, what are the results looking like to the eye in January and February? Are they competing? Have the kids taken a step? Are the veterans kind of bringing them along? We know there's not a whole lot of veterans left there. Jonathan Malee is doing what he can. Chase Lefebvre's doing what he can. But this is a young group. And all you're looking for is a couple of them to rise up and show signs that next year they're ready to step into bigger roles. Because right now, everyone in that lineup, aside from 2 or 3 players, is playing above their station at this point. Let's be honest. They shouldn't be top 6 players, but they are. They shouldn't be matching up against the best in the league, but they are. So that is going to lend to some questionable results. And things have that fire sale you mentioned, Mike, too. I think we just saw Liam Stushka out the door for the Peterborough Petes, and we wonder, could he have been leveraged earlier for some assets in a trade? We don't know. There were teams that needed a solid goaltender like that, and the market kind of ran dry on Peterborough. So generally speaking, things on and off ice have not been great for Peterborough early in this young season, but I always stick with it's October. Let's see where the signs trend over the course of the year.
Absolutely. And there will be growth. I believe in Rob Wilson there as the head coach and the rest of that coaching staff. I believe in the talent, obviously, on the roster. It's just that once that spiral starts, oh boy, is it hard to break out of. And I don't want to suggest that it's going to go this way, but at for your first 9 games, I mean, you're on pace for what? 7 wins on the season, maybe. So The historically bad season of the 1995 London Knights featured 3 victories alongside 60 losses, 6-0, and 3 ties when we still had them in the game. The numbers, though, for the Petes are on the ugly side. Along with that 0-8-1 record, they have scored just 15 goals through 9 games, just 15. They've allowed 41. Both of those are league lows in terms of the goals against, or a league high in terms of the goals for. 15 goals for is a league low, and 41 against is a league high. You look back on last season, and you talked about, Liam Stushka, and could more have been made of that from the front office? Last year, there was a lot of celebrating at the trade deadline because what the Peterborough Petes went out and did was added to their own first round pick from that 23 OHL priority draft and added 3 more players to it, right? Owen Beck gets traded to Saginaw. Along comes Aiden Young, who was the 16th pick in last year's OHL draft. Then Connor Smith and Sam McHugh get dealt to the Owen Sound Attack. Nico Addy comes back to the Peterborough Petes. Addy was the 12th selection in last year's draft. Donovan McCoy gets traded to the Sudbury Wolves. Caden Taylor comes back. He was the 9th pick in last year's draft. And you've got Carson Cameron already on your team. You drafted him, the Peterborough Petes did, in the first round last year. So you've got the 9th, the 12th, the 13th in Carson Cameron, and the 16th overall picks from a year ago. You love the look of it, but are these players being insulated enough? Do they have that experience and depth around them so they might be playing at least closer to their station than they currently are? And I'll just look at what those players still in the league are able to do. Everybody knew Owen Beck wasn't coming back. Jax Dubois was an overager when he got traded last year at the deadline by the Petes. But Sam McHugh and Connor Smith still putting up points for the Owen Sound Attack. They've each got 7 points in 8 games, 7 goals between them. That's half as many as the entire Pete's team has scored this year. And then you've got Donovan McCoy with 4 assists in 5 games for the Wolves. And you just have to wonder, would those players be making a difference for this young Peterborough Petes team? I know if you still have them, you don't have all 4 of those picks from that draft, but as nice as those players are in Young, Addy, Taylor, and Cameron, I'm not sure they've got the insulation around them. And I think this is the real danger when you go full on. I don't know that the Petes advertised it as a fire sale, but they stripped it down to the bare bones. There's no question about it. And I think this is the risk you run when you do that. And the hope has to be, to your point, Dan, are they passing the eye test in January and February? Does that spiral get a little bit slower and they start to work their way back up? Because as talented as these players are, you're counting on other teams' coaching or scouting staffs to have made the right selections at the right time in the draft. They were quality first rounders at the points they were taken. And you're hoping they can recover from what's got to be, and I'm not trying to pile onto it, but it's got to be a grind right now in the Lift Lock City.
Indeed. And I think you did a nice job, though, Mike, of summing up what the plan was when it could have been uglier. When you bring in, Young and Taylor and Addy, you're bringing in now bodies, right? 2 players that are born in 2007 in last year, so they have a year in the league. The thinking is this year you're not starting from scratch. You've got a little bit of a foundation built already. Had they just gone entirely for picks, how ugly would it be right now? You could nitpick, deals like the Addy deal. Could there have been more conditional picks based on Connor Smith playing an overage here or Donovan McCoy? You can probably fault GMs all day on little things like that with these deals. But at the end of the day, I believe Peterborough made the decisions they felt after discussions internally were the right decisions, which were to take some pain this year, bring in some pieces that are 2007 born that will start really heavily contributing next year, and then have some picks on top of that as well. So I think it was a calculated decision. And whenever you make those decisions, Mike, you're right. Did you get the calculus right in terms of the guys coming in? Are they as good as we thought they were? Are they gelling with what we needed? Are they as mature as we thought? And if it's not happening early, some of the questions come up like, well, is there a reason those teams moved on from those players and made them available? And you start second guessing a lot. But I think at the end of the day, we got to just remember these are still young players. It was a calculated decision by Peterborough. next year is going to be the real test. But you're right. You never want to hear the term historically bad when you're being described.
Excellent point on the nits we could still pick if we wanted to, and it's also fair to acknowledge that hindsight is 2020. We're talking about this now 9 games into this year. Again, there was a lot of celebration, like, wow, look at what Mike Oak did, the GM in Peterborough last year, by acquiring all of this young talent from that '07 birth year, that '07 draft class. So it's too early to write the obituary here. And dare I say, also to your point, if things turn around with all this talent in the next year or two, you might look back on this and say, oh, remember that pain? But it'll be pretty easily forgotten by a pretty loyal fan base up there in Peterborough, which, by the way, is just a season removed from an OHL championship. So let's not forget that part as well. Worth pointing out when I mentioned those points from Sam McHugh and Connor Smith with 7 points in 8 games, and Donovan McCoy with his 4 assists in 5 games. The point leaders right now on the Peterborough Petes are Jonathan Millay, who you've already referred to, and Colin Fitzgerald, both with just 5 points so far this season. It just, again, hindsight 2020. It's still early in this season, but you look at those players, the contributions they're making elsewhere, and you're thinking, it wouldn't hurt. It certainly wouldn't hurt to give these younger players that protection and have some insulation around them in Peterborough. On another side of the ledger, Dan, you have identified a couple of teams that you wanted to recognize as maybe overachieving a bit early in this OHL season.
Yeah, I mean, I look locally for the first one, right, which is the Kitchener Rangers. And I know everyone's going to say, whoa, 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 didn't this happen last year where the team overachieved early and then kind of flatlined in the second half? So everyone's going to be on the lookout for that. Top end of the lineup doesn't look terribly dynamic offensively. They're kind of getting it done now in a lot of close games, 3-2s, 4-2s, grinding it out. But I think you have to be impressed with 3-3-3s, 5 of 6, 5-6, 6 of 6. I mean, that's impressive for any team, let alone an extremely young team. And they're getting it done through, I believe, a slight change in the composition of this team. I felt last year where the team lacked was on the bottom 6. They didn't have a lot of that physicality, a lot of that grind, a lot of the ability to win board battles. So they got ground down over the year. I think this year's team made a couple subtle little tweaks, somewhat necessitated by injury, but bringing players in like Chris Grisolia from Barrie, Andrew Vermeulen from Niagara, are bigger body players, responsible players that can work the boards a little. So you've got a stronger composition in the bottom 6, I believe, with some new big bodies, Jack Labrache, Matthew Lachar. So these guys are able to win those battles a little more and play some of those tough minutes. So Kitchener's not as easy and out. And I think if we've seen anything early on in the season, when you've got goaltending of the caliber of Jackson Parsons and you've got that ability to win those board battles better this year, playing a tight system team game, they're actually getting it done. And it's actually been pretty impressive in the early going. And it is early going. I expect we'll see a return to earth, but definitely strong there. And then, of course, their counterparts who I predicted to miss the playoffs, who I've been somewhat impressed with early on, has been the Owen Sound Attack, who everyone wrote off as not having nearly enough this year. Colby Barlow demands out. So what are they doing? They're doing exactly what Owen Sound Attack hockey is known for. They're going in, they're grinding, they're playing a tough game, they're making it a tough night for whoever they play, and they're keeping absolutely every one of their games close. And when you keep it close, you never know what can happen, right? Get a power play goal, get a big save, and you know you're going to get those from Carter George. So I think good results early for those two teams, Mike.
We talked about it at the beginning of the season, Dan. Owen Sound, one of those teams with a new face and voice behind the bench in Scott Ray, who I think, and I said earlier, comes from what I would argue to be an underrated program in North Bay. They've got a real strong track record up there, so he's getting his first chance at this. And at the risk of sounding biased, but I'd love to know, and I know it's the team you watch the most too, but you got to be looking at this coaching staff that they have assembled in Kitchener with UC Ahokas, Jeff Kurzakis, and Brad Flynn, and watch the way this team is competing for them line over line over line over line. They're not going to win every night. We recognize that, but wins have come over the Niagara Ice Dogs recently, the 8th-ranked team in the CHL, the Saginaw Spirit, the defending Memorial Cup champions, etc. And you kind of get this rinse and repeat performance from the club. Every line gets out there, does what it's expected to do. When the top line's not producing, other lines are there to chip in. I give an awful lot of credit to what I'm seeing from that coaching staff.
100%. That's an excellent point. I think from day one, everyone could see this coaching staff was kind of a level above. They the special teams improved dramatically. You see in-game tweaks when things aren't going well. You see game over game tweaks. And the one thing that I think you can always judge a coaching group on is compete level. And a compete level overcomes a lot of warts for teams. And you're right, Mike. Aside from the flu-ridden game and wins early in the year, this team has competed every single night and like shift after shift, period after period. And there hasn't even really been a down stretch in most of these games this year. So that's a huge tip of the cap to the three men behind the bench, Ahokas, Krizakos, and Flynn. You see, each one of them has a role behind the bench, and they talk about how each player on the team has a role and understands the role. And I'm not sure that had happened a lot before this coaching staff came in. Thought there was a lot of the same, a lot of players all trying to do the same things, whether it was their strong suit or not. This team, every player and every line seems to understand what their strong suit is and what's expected of them. And that goes a long way when you get it coupled with that compete level. So yeah, huge tip of the cap to this coaching staff for sure.
Tanner Lamb, one of the other players in that '07 draft class we referred to earlier with Peterborough, but obviously drafted by Kitchener, had a 2-goal game this past week. And the day after, the head coach said, yeah, he's a good player when he works hard enough, but if he doesn't, he's just an average player, like any other player in the league. And Andrew Vermeulen, that veteran, bigger body that you referenced earlier too, Dan, told us in a post-game interview that UC Ahokas was a tough coach, but he didn't say it as a complaint. He wasn't saying it as a negative in any way. He's a tough coach. Clearly, the expectations are being set, and the players are going out there trying to meet those expectations. It's been fun to watch. It's early, but it's been impressive, like you talked about, since that illness-ridden opening weekend for the Kitchener Rangers. I think we knew, and we alluded to the fact that the London Knights were going to sort out their overage situation. We had also alluded to the fact that we weren't sure, based on some preseason even comments from management, that they were thrilled with their goaltending in London. And sure enough, Elliot Austin comes in to be the goaltender for the London Knights by way of the Saskatoon Blades. Like, okay. But anyway, Owen Wilmore, the overage goalie, gets released along with Alec Leonard. So the London Knights have sorted out their overage situation and brought in a guy from the Dub.
Yeah, I think we all saw it coming, did we not?
Yeah.
We knew that Mark and Dale Hunter would have a plan. We knew they were extending probably a little bit of rope out of respect to Owen Wilmore. And, he was a good goalie in his own right and had a lot of good times in London. But this is a team that has its designs on the top this year, competing for a Memorial Cup. And there aren't too many teams that do that without top end goaltending. And we know Austin Elliott, when his time in Saskatoon, had terrific numbers. Somehow made it through to the OHL through the waiver system as an overage. Barry snags him, of course, and shrewdly recovers a couple picks to get him to London. But yeah, it was a fix I think we all saw was coming, unless Owen Wilmore found another gear and played lights out for the first little while, which unfortunately wasn't happening. He was kind of at a disadvantage with some of the lineups London was running early in the year with players missing. As they've sorted things out, as we know they all will. Now they're going to tighten up. But goaltending was something that they never leave to chance. They didn't do it last year when they got Michael Simpson. If you look at their track record, their history, they want above average goaltending, and they went out and got it.
My apologies to the young man, too. I call everybody by their last name as a play-by-play guy, but indeed it is Austin Elliott, not Elliott Austin. Don't ever trust somebody, by the way, with two first names, okay? If your first name and your last name are interchangeable, I will never trust you, but that's just my own thing I got to get over. So London sorts out its overage situation. We talked last week on this podcast about the Kitchener Rangers sorting out theirs, and that there are difficult decisions still to come. And just think about where those difficult decisions are coming from, Dan. Also, on last week's episode, we talk about the Dallin Wakely Shamar Moses deal between Barrie and North Bay. So Wakely, an overager, joins a crowded overage crew in Barrie. So along with Wakely, the Colts still have Zach Weigel, Ty York, and Bo Jelsma. Jelsma is out still several weeks with an injury, but when he's healthy, one expects that he will be one of the overagers along with Wakely. You don't trade for him if you're not going to play him. Plus, he had 100+ points last year. So one of either Weigel or York are going to find themselves on the outside looking in. The Niagara Ice Dogs are a really interesting situation as well. They have Andre Loshko, who's been their top line center, also a curious case, waved through the queue and ending up in Niagara, but he's there. Noah Van Vliet, steady as she goes on the blue line. Owen Flores can not only fight, but he keeps pucks out of the net for Niagara. You think they'd want to keep that overage presence in goal. But oh, yeah, by the way, their captain, Gavin Bryant, is on the sidelines right now, coming back from an injury. He's still several weeks away, but that's a decision that's going to have to be made. And then the Brantford Bulldogs, already set, you think, with Zachary Lavoie, Ben Bujold, and Patrick Thomas. And what do the Belleville Senators do but send Tomas Hamara back to the Bulldogs? So they've got a decision to make as well.
Nice when your former owner takes on the Ottawa Senators, right? So they can use them as a little bit of a farm system to get Tomas Hamara back. Huge boost, and curiously, Ben Bujold's been missing from that lineup all year without a lot of explanation. So the assumption there is that Lavoie and Thomas would stick with Hamara as the overagers, and Bujold was probably on his way out based on how things have gone this year. But again, tough decisions because these players at the overage category all have value. And then, of course, you referenced the Gavin Bryant conundrum, we'll call it, in Niagara. I think that's a player that might have a bit of a market. Yeah, you wonder if, a team like Oshawa is still waiting to hear, is Dylan Rubrek coming back? They're definitely going to want to fill that slot. If not, so that's a team that might sniff around Gavin Bryant once he's healthy. His injury gives them some time to sort it out. If not, there's probably a couple other teams that would take a character player and leader like that. Not saying he's 100% the player that will be leaving Niagara. I just feel like there will be a market there to sort that out. So I think there is a pathway for all these teams to sort it out, but a lot of question marks right now early in the season.
Yeah, and it's getting kind of late, early, late, if you will, for these sorts of decisions still to be made. The injuries make it a little bit easier, if you will, gives teams a little more time. And when you make reference to the Ben Bujold situation, what a life it can be in junior hockey. A first rounder to the London Knights was Ben Bujold, and now in his final year in the league, he appears to be an odd man out in Brantford. Something interesting and somewhat related. Overagers in the Ontario Hockey League, of course, and across the CHL are 20 years old. But Ryan Kennedy of the Hockey News reporting just today that he's hearing that the next NHL CBA will allow 19-year-olds to go to the American Hockey League. Dan, that could be crippling to the Ontario Hockey League.
So Ryan Kennedy's report today is not news in the sense that this has been whispered about for a long time, really dating back to the last CBA, where a lot of teams were grumbling about the fact they couldn't send their high-end 19-year-olds to the AHL when they felt they had outgrown junior and wanted to at least be able to give them a stint in the AHL. We can debate all day whether or not that's good for them. I tend to lean on 90% of cases, junior players, teenage hockey players can benefit more from junior. I believe that strongly. Some of these teams obviously feel that, if you have a high-end kid, I don't know if that's a Matthew Poitras or name whichever high-end OHLer you've seen lately that might have benefited from some time in the AHL. They want that allowance. And I think there is going to be some movement on that end of the next CBA. I don't think they're going to leave it as is, especially given that the CHL leagues are the only ones kind of advocating against it. Teams, players, player agents, they all want that allowance. So it's going to be some sort of model, I think, that opens it up a bit. What I will say is this could be absolutely devastating to the CHL if they open it up carte blanche and just say, yeah, 19-year-old players are now eligible to play in the AHL. If there's some criteria around it, like it has to be a first-round pick, has to be a player who's completed 3 years in CHL, some sort of criteria like that, it might not be as major as some people think. But either way, it's going to have severe negative impacts on the CHL because in the best case scenario, these teams that are planning to contend in their contention cycle to go for a Memorial Cup might be doing so without their top end players. Suddenly, oops, Easton Cowan's not a London Knight this year. Oops, we see that stuff happening. So no matter what happens here, Mike, I can't see it being good news for the CHL.
I'm not comfortable with this really at any level. I mean, in the American Hockey League too, there will be jobs put at risk over something like this. And to the point you just made, Dan, there have got to be. Look, you're right, as is Ryan Kennedy, that this has been whispered about for quite some time. In fact, the last CBA almost included something like it. So to that end, it's almost inevitable that this will ultimately end up happening, and 19-year-olds could be assigned to the American Hockey League. But if there are not guardrails around it, I think that hockey as a game will essentially be eating its young men, because I just don't see any real value in what you would do to the American Hockey League and the composition of those rosters just at that level. And certainly in Major Junior, the league that we love so much. We've said it so many times. A player can oftentimes have his development hampered by being elevated too soon. Never does it happen the other way. Oh, shucks, he came back and dominated at the major junior level. Oh, shucks, he came back and had a chance to compete for a championship. That's never going to be a bad thing. So I would hope, at minimum, because it does sound like this eventually will happen, there are guardrails put in place around it, the likes of which you just suggested.
Yeah, well, very well said, Mike. What you just said is hammer on the head of the nail, because I think we have to get away from this notion that NHL teams and NHL personnel always know what's best for the player above anyone else. Because we've seen dozens upon dozens of really poor decisions made by NHL teams over the years, with players brought up too early, buried, not given ice time, stifling their offensive game. And like you just said, Mike, I have yet to find anyone give me a good example of a player that was really stunted by playing junior hockey at 19 years old. If anything, so what? They're dominating. That's great. You know how much you just elevated their offensive game? You want to turn them into a top six player? Well, then let them play a top six role. And I harken back to Max Pacioretty, who's now on your favorite team, Mike, and not a CHL player, but back when he was coming up in Montreal, he asked to be demoted to the AHL. And his rationale at the time was, you want me to be a top six player, I need to play a top six role. Don't bury me on the bottom six as a young player. Send me there, let me score. To me, the same principle applies in junior. If these 19-year-old players go play in the AHL, by and large, they're not playing big minutes. They're not playing important offensive roles. They're not playing on the power play. Put them where they can. You will not hurt them. You will not stunt them. So, yeah, I'm 100% with you on that one, Mike.
Dan, I have no idea why our inbox is not full of job offers from National Hockey League teams. I mean, if they're looking for advisors, we're sitting right here, guys. We may be in our basements, but we're sitting right here. Come on.
Exactly. I don't know, Mike. I don't know. No one listens to me.
I'll tell you what does come into our inbox at ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Emails from you. We love them. Keep them coming. Bill emailed to inquire as to, and this is somewhat related to what we just talked about, any update on the NCAA vote on CHL eligibility. So not really a ton, Bill. The legislation was introduced at the NCAA D1 Council on October the 8th. They're going to vote in November, so a couple of weeks from now at their November meeting. And then if approved, as both Dan and I believe it will be, and most others believe it will be, the rule would take effect on August the 1st of 2025, which means the first year of eligibility would be next season. So I suspect that's all going to happen, but that's sort of housekeeping at this point and keeps you up to speed on what's going on there. Josh sends an email to ohlpodcast@rogers.com. Guys, I loved the expansion talk in last week's pod. So did I, Josh. Like, I'm so ready for Cornwall to be back in this league. Holy heck. Josh says, I've often thought Western New York would be prime for OHL expansion. Was there a potential new arena to be built in Niagara Falls, USA? Along with those impending NCAA changes, do you think having more U.S. teams in the OHL/CHL might attract more top-end talent from the U.S.? Josh, thanks for the email. Dansky, thoughts?
Well, a nuance, the territorial thing that a lot of people don't understand is that I think both the OHL and the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League and Maritime, sorry, I forgot that added in now. To have exclusivity to a territory, they have to have a team there, and no other league have a team there. So those two leagues have both kind of been eyeing New York State for a while without a team being there. So I think both those leagues would really like to see if there's a viable market they could use in New York State. We know Rochester already has an American Hockey League team that does quite well. Niagara Falls, potentially based on arena. As you get further upstate, it gets trickier, or further anyway. But I think that the exploration has probably gone on a little bit more in depth than people realize. Because if that were to be the case, then all the New York State-born players would then have to go through the OHL draft first before those players could go to these other leagues. So there'd be a little bit less of a battle for their services, and probably lure more players in general too. So I think there's some thought going on there, Josh. I'm just not sure at this moment in time I see a clear market that's ready for it.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. Excellent question, though, and it gets into the intrigue and interest. I'll put both because it can get pretty deep when you start talking about those territorial rights. It's very intriguing indeed. All right, send us emails anytime, by the way. ohlpodcast@rogers.com. We love hearing from you. Drop a comment on the YouTube page. Hit us up on Twitter. Dan is at his name, at Dan Mahar. I'm at Farwell_OHL. We love the interaction. We're here for it. And we want to, if we can answer your questions or give you news that you're interested in or in more hot takes. Do we have a hot take yet? Only asking for GM jobs shamelessly. That's about it. Anything you want. We're here for the conversation about junior hockey. How many minutes can one goalie play? It's not a rhetorical question. And if you're Brian Kilrea, the answer is 47,304,000 minutes. Don't worry. It'll all make sense as it always does, or at least as much sense as I can make of it here on the OHL podcast. Let's be honest. I love it when people listen to sports on the radio because that is exactly what keeps me employed, in case you didn't know that. But nothing beats going to a game live, and we know this, right? The roar of the crowd, the thrill of the victory, and you get to be a part of it. Now, it's even easier for you to be a part of it with GameTime. And the GameTime app isn't just for live sports. It should be your go-to app for any live event, from concerts to monster truck shows. Now, GameTime even offers GameTime Picks, a new feature that sorts through the fluff so you only see incredible deals on the best seats, and you're not stuck wasting time searching through thousands of tickets. I'm not the most tech-savvy guy, okay? But the GameTime interface is so easy to use, you'll wonder why you ever tried anything else for tickets. And while I may not be the most tech-savvy, I am cheap, which is what makes GameTime's super deal the deal for me. Not to mention the lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and all-in pricing, so you're not surprised by extra fees at the checkout. If you find a lower price, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. And you'll also get a chance to check out a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. It's all right there in the app. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime Picks. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code THPN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code THPN for $20 off. Download GameTime today. What time is it? Game time. Dan, you brought this up in our texting conversations before this week's episode, and we sat down to record. Andrew Oak has so far, Memorial Cup winning Andrew Oak, I might add, but has so far played every minute of every game for the Saginaw Spirit this season.
Yeah, I think it's of note, Mike, just because it's really unheard of. You don't see this very often. You have some excellent goalies in this league, especially some veterans that you know can carry the mail for a team. Even you rarely see a player this deep into the season having played every game for his team. And there's reasons for that. When you've got a young backup goaltender and potentially some health issues there, you kind of have to go with what you've got. It is a bit of a roll of the dice, though. It's a league that has a lot of 3-3s and 3-4s, and that's asking a lot of a goaltender. And you hate to think that you're going to encourage an injury or anything, so you don't want to see that happen. So I imagine we'll see that streak end soon. But definitely of note to get to this stage of the season, Mike, and see a goaltender having played every minute.
I love it in one aspect, and that is, I mean, before players get to this level, and I know with Oak, we're talking about an overager now, but before you're a 16-year-old goalie in the Ontario Hockey League, you're a 15-year-old goalie, sometimes playing 3 games in a day. Like, it's just the difference when we move up from one league to the next or one level. I find it kind of interesting, and I do believe in their heart of hearts, guys want to get out there and play every single game. They want to stop all the pucks all the time. However, we have learned, and your point on 3-3s is very well taken. We've got to go back a quarter century, Dan, to Aaron Molnar of the London Knights back in 2000, 2001. He did play 68 games that season, every single one of them. And then he's followed by Kyle Gajewski, who I remember so well from the Sioux in '06. Jack Flynn with Mississauga in 16. Remember him? And Spencer Martin, also with Mississauga in 14. So just a decade ago, all three of those guys, Gajewski, Flynn, and Martin, played 64 games. And I'm pretty sure Michael Hauser, also with London, going back to the Aaron Molnar example, was a 63 game guy for the Knights, not too long ago. But anyway, what Oak is doing is unprecedented in recent times. That is for sure.
Yeah, you can. I can hear these people yelling at the podcast right now, Mike. These guys are 19. Of course, they can play every day. They want to like give me a break. They're going to practice anyway, which is true. And I think a lot of the times when you see these other players, other goalies getting opportunities, it's for that reason. It's teams want to develop them, and you're not going to do that if one guy's playing 68 games. So you want to get that guy in, get him some minutes, getting some meaningful starts, especially in those sandwich games and 3-on-3s. But yeah, not too worried about Andrew Oak's ability to handle it with his experience. He's obviously done it okay so far.
These guys are 19, Dan just said. 19, not 90, 90. That is the birthday celebrated by the Ottawa 67s this past weekend for their legendary former head coach, Brian, they call me Killer, Kilrea. I don't know what this game would be if Brian Kilrea had not been involved in it. He's one of a handful of those giants of this game, but what a character. What a guy. The winningest coach in OHL history with 1,193. Unfortunately, the Barber Poles could not do this past weekend in celebrating Kilrea's 90th birthday what they did for him back in 2009 in his final regular season game behind the bench. They won that final game, win number 1193 for Kilrea back in '09. 67's lost to the Barrie Colts this weekend as they celebrated Kilrea's 90th birthday. But goodness gracious, Dan, I don't know. Honestly, we could do a whole episode on Brian Kilrea. And by the way, we have, if you go back and search for the OHL podcast with Brian Kilrea, you'll find about a 90-minute discussion where Brian just tells stories. It was back in December of 2020. If you want to look it up, it is well worth your time.
He's one of those figures that you never thought you'd imagine the league without him, right? Now he's been removed for a few years, but he still feels like he's present in that Ottawa often. So we wish him many more, and I promise, Brian Kilrea, we will not ask you to play 3-3 right now.
Some of the things, if you don't know much about Brian Kilrea, other than those statistics, did I mention the 1,193 wins, the most ever by an OHL coach? He was a huge fan of Anne Murray and good cigars. So the bus was often filled with both songs of Anne Murray. He had his own little, and he told the story on the episode of this podcast that he did with, he told he'd have his own little tape machine to play Anne Murray music. And the bus driver, let this sink in, would crack open the window so that Killer could smoke his cigar on board the bus. One of the other stories that he told on the podcast that I thought was so funny. He says, look, I don't have a lot of rules, but there were certain things that, like, he was pretty loose. He was what you would call a player's coach. But he said, there's two things I really don't like: long hair and jewelry. Don't have earrings if you're going to be on my team, right? So this one player wore an earring all the time. And despite the rule that Brian Kilrea implemented with the Ottawa 67s, the kid wore an earring. Well, wouldn't you know that this same kid was having trouble with the Billet family? Now, Killer never mentioned who the kid was when he told the story, but he's like, listen, I'm not really comfortable in my Billet family's house. Can you find me a new Billet family? And Killer thought about it. He's going to do it. He's going to be there for the kid, wants the kid to be comfortable. But then he sees him at practice. He's still wearing this earring. He's like, that's it. This kid's clearly not listening to me. So he went and made a trade. And then he called the kid into his office and says, I got you that new Billet family you're looking for. Oh, cool. Yeah, but they're in Windsor. Pack your bags. So the kid, you want to keep wearing your earring? That's fine. You can wear it in Windsor. But hey, at the same time, I cleared up that little Billet family situation for you. He did name Brian Kilrea Sean Donovan specifically in one of the other stories he shared. And Sean Donovan loved to get up the ice and didn't always come back the way that he should have. And Killer was all upset at one intermission. And he went in and he was trying to rally the team and motivate the team. And he said, he just looked right at Sean Donovan and says, Donovan, I don't know if you're playing right wing for me or left wing for them. And the whole room just burst into laughter from that one. And just one more I got to share, and you can hear it, please, because this is just a snapshot of the stories that Brian Kilrea told. But he was famous for saying, when you play for my team, you've got three options for clearing the defensive zone. And so I asked him about that in the podcast, and he says, I'll leave out the descriptive word, but you're right. The three options are get the puck off the bleeping glass and out, get the puck off the bleeping glass and out, get the puck off the bleeping glass and out. Those were the three options to clear the defensive zone if you were playing for Brian Kilrea. And he, quote unquote, left the descriptive word out of the podcast. Even we had him when he was 86 years old, and he would not curse on the air.
Those are all great stories, but I think, when you look at Anne Murray, cigars, and puck off the glass without fail, the modern players might not all identify with those three things. So they might have to adapt to come back in the room today.
Excellent point. I'll drop the link to that episode in the description of this episode. So if you want to go back and find it more easily, it really is worth the listen. So many great stories. And Brian Kilrea, listen, sir, happy 90th. I hope you could have 90 more. I really do. And I'm going to feel a little bit bad when Dale Hunter passes you for most coaching wins, but it's going to happen. It's inevitable. Hunter's only like 250 behind at this point. So anyway, there's that. Okay. I think the last order of business here for us, Dan, is our prospects of the week. So let's dive into that. Who you got?
Yeah, I got to take a few extra seconds here, Mike, to give a little background on my guy this week because he was passed over in the last NHL draft, and that is Christian Epperson on the Saginaw Spirit. And the reason I want to give this guy a shout out is phenomenally talented player, went the route of the U.S. National Team Development Program, and that's reserved for those that don't know, for the elite players in that age group. They build a team of who they feel are the most skilled players of that birth year. So all talented players, but it's a team like any other where these players are asked to play the various roles on a team. And Epperson was asked to play a more a depth role there and checking role, which was not really in his skill set. So got hidden a little in that program, came to the OHL, and then was behind a lot of good players last year. So what you're seeing this year with some of the graduations in the Saginaw Spirit, and he's been able to emerge back into that top six player and flash that skill, and he's surprising people league wide. And I just say, I went to a Saginaw Spirit game looking for Michael Misa and Zane Parekh, and it was this guy that catches my eye. This guy's driving the play, and please don't say, oh, he's riding the coattails of Misa because he's on that low. No, he is driving the play himself. 16 points in 9 games. I pretty much guarantee you Christian Epperson will not be passed over a second time in the NHL draft. So he's my guy for this week, Mike.
Excellent selection. I was going to mention it certainly doesn't hurt playing with a guy like Michael Misa. However, having had my own firsthand viewing of him, you're not wrong at all, Dansky, where Christian Epperson is driving the play all by himself just fine. Thank you very much. I'm going to be accused of being a homer this week, but that's okay. I'll accept that because I have the privilege of watching a young player that when he came into this league, one of that '07 draft class for the Kitchener Rangers, he was already being touted as a potential first rounder to the National Hockey League. That hype has not died down entirely. Maybe not first round, some say, but he's going to be a high pick to the National Hockey League. But 11 games into this season, I have watched Cameron Reid really begin to emerge even more. He'll take over shifts when he's on the ice. I'm not saying he's taking over entire games yet, but he's coming off a career-high 3-assist performance versus the Niagara Ice Dogs this past weekend. He's a +2 on the week, along with those 3 assists. He's got 5 points during this 4-game winning streak for the Kitchener Rangers, but just watching the poise, watching him lead rushes up the ice, watching him jump into the offense and still get back to be responsible defensively. It's the next step, I think, that we would expect a potential first rounder to take. Cameron Reid is already taking it early in the season, and I suspect he will very much be in the first round conversation when June rolls around. So my prospect of the week is right out of the team I watch each and every night, and that is Cameron Reed, defenseman for the Kitchener Rangers.
Look, I mentioned he was my runner-up, Mike. Yeah, I mean, yeah. If anyone wants to see what an NHL level skater looks like in the OHL, go watch Cameron Reed. The skating is phenomenal. You're right; it's going to get him picked quite high in this year's draft.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned the skating, and I should have really focused on that because, again, watching one team more often than any other, you develop these biases towards them. But I've seen, and I'm not trying to say he's the next Jamie Drysdale. Don't get me wrong, but I've seen guys like that, and I'm like, wow, like look at how gifted those players are. I'm starting to see that in Cameron Reed as well. So it's a special player, and he's going to make an NHL team very happy. So Christian Epperson for Dan, Cameron Reed for me, and our time with you is done for another week. Please tell a friend about the OHL podcast, okay? Because if it's one thing Dan and I would like more of, it's friends. Like, what do you think we need to do, Dan? What is it? Do I cheer for the wrong team in the NHL or the OHL? Like, what's going on here? They like me in Guelph. I'm going to I put that in there. I think they like me in Guelph.
Well, maybe. I don't know about the other way on the 401. We'll just... But yeah, we can always use more friends. So yeah,
we can. All right. Well, listen, be a friend, drop a comment on YouTube, tweet at us, or send an email to ohlpodcast@rogers.com. His name is Dan Mahar. I'm Mike Farwell. We'll be back with another episode of the OHL podcast 1 week from today.